Welcome everyone. I'm Michael Hernandez. I am a educator, speaker, and education consultant in Los Angeles, and I'm really excited for the second month of our educator webinars. Today's topic is inquiry-based learning and assignments, and I'm really excited to share some insights with you and kind of explore some ideas and options to help make your classrooms more dynamic and get students engaged and elevate learning and make school fun again. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What we're going to do here is have time for a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to kind of go through a bunch of ideas with you, and then we'll have some time for conversation. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat as well. If you are watching this after the fact through a recording, welcome. And you could see some links below in the comments area to reach out to me if you have questions and want to start a conversation that way as well. I am going to share my screen here and go ahead and get started on my presentation. My contact info is there if you guys want to follow me on the socials on Instagram and Blue Sky, and of course LinkedIn as well, and my email address is there as well. So what are we going to talk about today, which is why do we need inquiry-based learning to begin with? We'll start there. What is the need and what is the challenge that we're facing, and how can inquiry-based learning help us solve those problems? What is inquiry-based learning? I think you're just defining that. And what does that look like in the classroom is going to be really important to understand. And then we'll talk about several examples and case studies because it's great. Words are fine, but we want to see where the rubber hits the road and what that actually looks like in real classrooms. So we'll be sharing some classroom tested examples of that. Some scaffolding strategies for how to start integrating inquiry-based learning into your classrooms and what you're struggling with, and hopefully some solutions for that. And then we'll talk about assessment and grading. How do you grade inquiry-based projects? Because they're a little bit different than tests and worksheets and things like that. Let's go ahead and dive in. What is the conditions that we're living in? Well, many of us just went back to school, so we understand that engagement is a big issue. In fact, Gallup did a poll this year that found up to 54% of Gen Z K-12 students report lacking engaging experiences in school. So there's nothing engaging there. But they did say that students are most excited to learn when teachers make learning interesting. Okay, so it doesn't mean song and dance and costumes and all that. It should be generated from the student. What's interesting to the student? How can we tap into that and leverage that to help make our assignments more interesting and engaging? We know that many of us struggle with chronic absenteeism, and at higher ed levels, college retention rates are dropping. Okay, and so these are all concerns about just showing up physically and intellectually. So that's something that we're all really worried about. And now on top of that, artificial intelligence. So if we ask kids to check a box, AI will help them check a box, right? And so we want to maybe shift away from box checking, fill in the blank kind of assignments, or those that don't feel connected to the students' lived lives and experiences into something that's more meaningful to them and yet still allows us to address all of the important content, knowledge, and skills from our curriculum. So that's kind of what this is about. And in fact, there's some research that even shows that project-based learning, or knowledge in action is how these researchers defined it. Knowledge in action actually improves test scores. So we know that recently there was the national report card just came out, and everybody's scores are down. And so if that is a concern for us, if that is a metric for success, then we need to find a solution other than more test prep, because clearly that's not working. So we need to find a different solution. And we also know on the emotional and psychological side of things, students are really struggling. And it turns out that research is saying, hey, the cause of the decline in children's mental well-being is actually caused by a decline in their independent activity. In other words, if students don't have agency, they are going to be unhealthy psychologically. And so these kinds of projects can help provide agency. Um, and we also know that the best way to learn something is to teach it. As educators, we know that, but why not have our students do that as well? And part of a big piece of the inquiry assignments is the reporting and the communicating of what the findings of what they found and the process. So that's a type of storytelling, and that's a type of teaching. And so that's what we want to I guess, embrace and leverage for our classrooms. And again, more research. This isn't just me and my personal experience and anecdotes, but there's a lot of research that curiosity, which is part of the inquiry process, improves reading and math achievement. And then the memorization of facts, like we find on tests and a lot of handwritten in-class reports, blue book assignments that people are turning to now because they're afraid of cheating from AI. That basically requires memorization. And so it doesn't help higher level thinking, which is what we really want to have happen. And that's actually backed up with the World Economic Forum report, Future of Jobs report. And what are the skills and mindsets that employers are looking for employees? And you'll notice that the top ones are things like analytical thinking, resiliency, flexibility, agility, leadership, social influence, creative thinking, self awareness, technological literacy, empathy, and active listening. These are all core traits of inquiry mindsets and inquiry assignments. And so that's not just a nice to have, this is in demand if we want our students to be successful once they leave school. So whether they're in high school, secondary, or whether they're in the university level, they're going to be right out there in the job market very soon. And so we want them to be prepared. So part of this is maybe shifting our role and thinking and defining what our roles are. And so just to clarify, in an inquiry based learning situation, what the role of a student and the teacher are. So students are the ones who should be posing the questions. And I know you probably struggle with this too, but my students really struggle to ask good questions. They haven't been asked to do that, or they're afraid of getting shot down if they ask a question, either because they're afraid of looking unintelligent or not prepared, or that it might be disruptive to the status quo. And so there's a lot of issues around safety and intellectual safety that need to be bolstered in order for this to work. But that's the role of the students in the inquiry process. They should be constructing evidence-based explanations. So much of our classrooms that I see, at least in where I teach, is, you have your opinion. This is what I've experienced, and if I'm gonna argue loud enough, or I seem articulate or have a presence in a speech or a debate, that's gonna work. But no, we need evidence. And so this isn't just about expressing your opinion. This is backing it up with reliable sources and data that we can trust. And then the communication piece is huge in this. So, and that's where traditional assignments kind of falter. There really is no communication method other than writing an essay. And I don't know about you, but I didn't become a good writer until, I don't know, maybe last week. Just my mind wasn't there yet. I had some ideas, but even that was in development. But are there many ways that students can communicate and share their knowledge and express what they know that's not tied to just written essays or handwritten essays? And then the role of the teacher is more of a provocateur, someone who can scaffold the experience, who can create design constraints. So, in other words, we can't let students just do whatever they want. And yes, we want to encourage great questions and exploration of topics or angles that we hadn't considered yet. But it's our job to help them, work within boundaries, deadlines, timelines, length, quality, those kinds of constraints. And also to model this thinking process. So as we teach, as we have direct instruction, as we give our assignments and the topics for the assignments, can that also model the inquiry process? Instead of having definitive, I know this and I know that, can we pose questions and have the students kind of react to those? And then again, setting checkpoints, like I said, deadlines and timetables and deliverables is really important in this process too. So that's our role. Right. Okay, cool. So what is inquiry-based learning? And there's levels of inquiry. So there's confirmation, guided inquiry, and then open inquiry. So confirmation would be where we're practicing the skills and the mindsets of how to write good questions, how to ask good questions, where to find research, and having very tailored, concise practice in doing that. Guided would be where we might have a bank of questions for students to choose from, or a bank of topics or aspects of a topic that we want them to explore. And then the open inquiry is maybe in a summative assignment. at the end of a semester or a unit, where it's sort of wide open and the students have to not only ask their questions, but they also have to develop their methodology. What is my process for doing this, and why is this a good method for finding out the answers to this problem or this question? And so we just kind of build on that process. And something that I wrote about recently in my latest email newsletter was this idea that sort of came to me sort of late. I've been thinking about this topic for a long time and been using inquiry mindset in the classes that I teach, which are high school journalism and filmmaking, so like documentary, nonfiction filmmaking, and things like that. Which is, you know what? Instead of thinking of our learning spaces as a classroom, why don't we think of them as a workshop? Now, I kind of came to this idea and this conclusion when I was leading a workshop this summer at the ISTE ASCD conference on uncheatable assessments. And everybody had the tools, everybody had the buy-in to the process, but what they really struggled with was that process. And so this idea that, what does the classroom connotate? What comes to mind when we say classroom? It means students sitting in rows. It means compliance. It means being quiet. It means doing your work on a time schedule and having the exact same answer as the kid next to them. Well, that's just not only not interesting, it's not very human and creative, but it's also a great way to set yourself up for cheating if every student is expected to have the same answer. And so instead of calling ourselves like a classroom, what if it was a workshop? And I don't mean like a woodworking, furniture making workshop or a STEM workshop, which are great. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm teaching math or social studies, I'm not going to have a STEM lab. That doesn't make sense. But we might be familiar with a writer's workshop in a language arts class where we develop a book or a short story with collaborative tools and processes. We might think of a think tank in a social studies setting and civics and government and economic setting, right? And so there are models in this in academia where we can draw upon of let's ask a question, let's take the data and observe what's going on, find a good question that we're going to research, and then follow up on that and deliver some answers to an end user, right? And so I think there's plenty of models that are out there to do that. So it's just an interesting, just shifting what we call it can completely change our what we do, what we expect, and how we work, how we talk to each other, and what our end result is going to be. What is our learning outcome and our learning evidence? So that's really something that just sort of struck me like a lightning bolt this summer. I don't know why, but there you have it. All right, let's talk about some actual case studies from the classroom. So it's all well and good to be philosophical, but what does it actually look like? I'm going to play this for you. So this is a multimedia research project that in my book I call an advocacy project. This is where the students are doing research around a topic and advocating for a certain behavior, action, or point of view. And this might be a replacement for anytime you have like a debate or a class presentation where someone's advocating, writing an opinion article, something like that, except it's a visual. So this is a 30-second video, a public service announcement PSA, which typically is about, advocating for a change of behavior or mindset. So this particular project, the assignment these students had was the general big topic of climate change. And then they were assigned a research process. These are high school students. These are freshmen in high school. For many of them, it was their first time doing annotated bibliographies and using EBSCOhost and doing some high-level quality research, not just random Google search or AI searches, and parsing through that. And then from the research they found, they wrote a script, cast actors, shot and edited this piece. So I'm going to play this for you. Hopefully you guys can hear that. I'll turn up the volume here and hopefully you guys can listen to this. And I'll share a link to this in the follow-up email and in the notes when I post this on YouTube as well. Here we go.
This is Dave. Dave cares about the environment. He tried to do as much as he could and warn his friends and neighbors about their energy bills. They weren't interested. So Dave got on his bike and started home, but suddenly, Dave thought of something. So Dave did some research. Dave realized the light bulbs could help his friends and neighbors fight global warming. Who thought that something so simple could make such a difference? Good job, Dave.
All right, there you go. So sort of a fun, funny type of approach. Well, what was interesting is in her research, Avery discovered that well, first of all, she wanted to make this for her peers, and make it in a way that was actionable and doable and not seem overwhelming or depressing. It's a big topic that can be depressing, that does cause anxiety in students. But she wanted something that was actionable. So in her research, she discovered that using energy efficient light bulbs was a great way to cut down carbon emissions. And so that's what she made her story about. There's also an interesting little aside. There was a shot with a couple of faucets being turned off, right? Wasting water. What does that have to do with light bulbs? So it turned out in her research, she found in the state of California, where we live, that the number one use of power is water, pumping it out of the ground, pumping it over mountain ranges from Colorado and from Northern California to get to Southern California, distributing the water was the number one use of power. And so that was sort of an Easter egg that she just kind of dropped in there as an aside, but sort of interesting how she integrated that. So, pretty great use of having a question, or this is maybe a guided question. So I gave them a topic and I said, you get to choose what this is going to be about, but you need to find a solution around this topic. Um, so that's a pretty cool one. This other inquiry project is another multimedia research project called an infographic. And this is from my friend Jody Deinhammer, who is a science teacher in the Dallas area. This is also featured in my book. And she asked her students, challenged her students in her, biology class, to explore the effects of different types of chemicals in the body. And so the students got to choose with that narrow topic what chemicals they were going to address. And so this is a chemical that's in sports drinks and the effect that it has on the human body. And they actually did research and labs and tested out the different effects. And you can see the data being posted here. So what's cool is the students had a lot of agency over what aspect they were going to explore, something that related to them and their lives. They had to still do the deep research about what is this chemical, what's its effect on the body. They still had to do the lab work and go through all of those skills and learn that process and then integrate it and then create this graphic where they're again using creativity skills and communication skills, both with text and illustration. And then this image, this graphic can now be shared on their website or on social media posts to help their people in their community live better lives. And so we have all of these pieces here, the inquiry piece and also a purpose behind it. Another sort of high level project that's a little bit more on the complex side is like an oral history project, which would be like maybe a documentary or an actual video documentary. This is actually a still image of some students of mine when we went to Vietnam to produce documentaries there. And this scene in particular was outside of the street where the famous picture of Kim Phuc, who was the Napalm Girl, the famous picture from the New York Times during the Vietnam War. That's right out there on that street. And so the students actually got to experience that place and be there and then interview people who were around about their experience. And so very interactive. Another project that sort of inquiry based is one of my students discovered in our neighborhood that there was an intersection where cars were running the stop sign and discovered this was going on and wanted to do something about it. So the student did a lot of research about reckless driving that has been on the increase since the pandemic, what the laws were, statistics, um, went out and documented this with their camera. They did qualitative research studies, meaning interviews of experts and witnesses and people in the community, and then published this live. And what was really cool is the police then saw this and after they saw it, they started parking a patrol car in that intersection and giving people tickets for running the stop sign. And so this is a really great way to have students ask a question, what's going on? What's the effect? Why is this on the increase? What can I do about it? What are all these different components? And so you actually got them to get a public agency to take action. So that was a pretty empowering piece that provides lots of student agency from everything from choosing the research topic to how, their methodology of how they were going to do it. And of course, the student had been in my class for a while. We had scaffolded the process of how to do these kinds of projects. And then the impact, what's the reaction and effect of their work when we publish this publicly. So it's another key piece that we'll talk about here. So again, going back to the scaffolding strategies of inquiry mindset, confirmation is like a lab or activity to confirm the concepts of inquiry. What is a good question or questions? What's the process and strategy for doing that research? structured and guided. Again, where we kind of give guiding questions or a menu of options for the students, and then they can investigate and interpret based on that. And then the open, authentic types of strategies where students develop their own questions, their design methods, and pursue new answers that we hadn't uh, preconceived. There is no necessary outcome for, I don't know how it's going to turn out when he does a research project on people running the stop sign, or what happens with this interview, people in Vietnam, or what's going to happen when I explore this concept of climate change in my community. Right. So that's pretty empowering. And then, okay, so the big question is for all of us, like, yeah, great, but how do you grade those things, right? It's not a test that you run through the Scantron machine or there's one right answer and it's easy, it's very black and white. And so I might offer some of these ways that you can assess inquiry-based projects, which is first of all, the quality of the research questions and the hypothesis to begin with. So, is the beginning question solid, unique, original, thought provoking, actionable, whatever those qualities are? How do they use evidence and what is their methodology? Are they following a tried and true methodology that we know is going to be reliable? How much and what quality of evidence do they have? What is their reasoning and analysis, and like how deep do they go? Are they missing something? Communication. So again, sharing out, show what you know, right? That's what we ask students to do in essays and lab reports. This is just maybe a different way of doing that. And it's not that you can't do those. Those might be actually part of it. Do those and maybe some of these multimedia research projects where the outcome is shareable to a wider audience because no one's going to read an essay and it just ends up in the trash. So if we want these to have impact and the students to be empowered, then we need to give them that opportunity through other means to communicate their findings and their thinking. And then again, speaking of thinking, the reflection metacognition piece. How do students reflect on their methodology, their outcomes, and their challenges? We might also consider having separate grades for the content versus the design or delivery of those projects. Emphasizing process is huge. Like I said at the beginning, if our classrooms are workshops instead of test factories, then we can really work on having fidelity related to research methods and collaboration and self-reflection. And those are really the skills that will foster lifelong learning and quality thinking as we put students out into the world. We don't want them to memorize and regurgitate because now they get out there into the world and they have no idea how to do this on their own when it really matters. We're going to expect these people to vote and drive and be employees. Like, can they work on their own and figure this out? And that's really what we're trying to teach them, not how to memorize or Google something, right? Um, we want to reward originality and courage. This is really, really important. And it's something that's really not really in our society in general right now. It's a difficult thing to do for sure, but that's really where the money is, right? That's really where the importance is. And then authenticity and impact. Is this real? We want to move away from simulations and because that's why kids aren't showing up because it's fake. I think if our assignments are just pretend, why should I put in any effort into it? But if they're like, hey, this is something that's actually going on with my friends right now, I'm wondering about this. I see this happening in the street around my corner. I wonder about it and I want to do something about it. So we need to connect our assignments to the real lived experiences of our students in our schools, in our communities right now, not just simulations. Another way that I would say helps with grading for projects like this is what I feature in my book and my online course, Uncheatable Assessments, which is the four pillars of assessment. So this is a way to triangulate grading. And we're going to get into this more next month in the webinar about uncheatable assessments, which is having assessments of some kind from these different stakeholders. So from the teacher, obviously, because you're the content expert and you've set up those expectations. Self-evaluation, we talked about that already. Peer evaluation. So if this is a public artifact, whether it's an infographic, a documentary, a PSA, a digital book, something like that, maybe even like an explainer video or a presentation, what's the feedback from the students and the criteria on that, which also fosters how to give and receive good feedback. And then audience feedback. So if this is published publicly, what is the engagement? What are the clicks, the likes, the reshares, the reposts, and things like that that can give us some important data? All right, so some big concerns that many teachers often hear in workshops is, yeah, but this type of assignment isn't rigorous enough. Well, you just need to have the right expectations and high expectations, and I guarantee you, creating a documentary is way harder than writing an essay or taking a test. It's producing a podcast and having to interview an expert and find them and track them down and parse out the reality is way harder than filling out a worksheet. So this is definitely more rigorous. There's too much grading. I don't want to do this. There are ways to kind of break this down. Also have peer evaluations along the way. So you don't have to grade everything, every artifact. There's a way to give peer evaluations in that workshop model to scaffold it, and then you check in at certain points and certain steps. And there's also ways to have individual grading versus group grades, which is if you're working collaborative assignments, a way that you can still have responsibility and ownership. My students won't engage in my assignments. Well, that's what we normally hear from traditional assignments. But again, if the students care about this, if this is something that we've given them the option and responsibility for choosing, I want to explore this topic because I care about it or I'm interested in it or I wonder about it. They're going to be engaged naturally. It's not, you don't have to force them into doing it. And so the question is, how do I frame this sandbox as the instigator and as the leader of this inquiry process, as the educator? And then within that box, they are free to explore and do it in ways that make sense to them. So there's plenty of ways for the students to be engaged because it's very personal. The course is too content heavy to do these kinds of projects. That may be the case if you're teaching engineering or organic chemistry, but maybe I would suggest doing a small, lighter lift assignment, converting it into an inquiry-based project, or scaffolding your entire semester this way. Our entire class is a journey to answer a big question. And along the way, we're going to do all of those sort of traditional assignments with the purpose of supporting that end product that we create at the end. And that's kind of what my book is about, storytelling with purpose. I'll share details on that in a moment. All right, so some best practices before we head out here. We're getting close to our 30-minute time here. Modeling the inquiry process. So when I am teaching, I have direct instruction, have open-ended answers. Now, clearly there are some problems, challenges, or situations where there is one right answer, but many times there are not. And so how can we ask questions and be courageous in our process and show vulnerability as educator, like, you know what, I don't know the answer, let's find out together, or can you help me research this and then report back and we'll share it with everybody else. This idea of originality also is sort of a foreign topic in traditional schools where everybody has supposed to have the exact same answer at the same time. um, but this is really where the creativity comes from and the engagement piece comes from, and also the impact. If something is unique and one of a kind, it's uncheatable, and also it's meaningful to the students because that's what we all care about as being individual humans. Um, Setting boundaries, like we talked about before, deadlines and check-ins are very, very important. You can't just say, come back in a week with this thing or come back in a month with this done. You have to scaffold it and have definite breakdowns and deadlines along the way. I learned that the hard way. um, Share diverse, high quality examples. So, I just gave you several, some from science, some from social studies, some from journalism. There's a variety of different ways that we can share these. Professional examples are always the best, but definitely share a variety of different ways of doing this. And then share learning artifacts publicly. So again, how will you publish and display these? Whether the students have their own portfolio, like a website portfolio or a digital book, maybe you have a class website or social media channel. You can post some of, maybe not all of them, but many of them. Um, and so there's sort of an onus to get it right because other people are going to have their eyes on it. And their friends, their parents might see it, right? And will judge them. All right. So that is sort of wrapping up. Before I let you go, a couple of highlights and things to look for. Coming up next month in October, we're having a webinar on how to publish your first nonfiction book. That was a big mystery to me when I published mine, and so I'm going to share some details on that. Also, how to design uncheatable assessments. We talked about that today in this webinar, but we will also go into some more detail on that. And then in November, for leadership, budget conscious professional development options, what can we do to do that? And then kind of an extension of today, how to design and grade project-based assignments. So we tapped into that a little bit. We'll go into more depth on that a little bit later. And then some other goodies for you. The webinar next month on how to publish your first book is actually, I'm offering that as a 4-week workshop. So it's 4 90-minute sessions where you will actually be working on your book and learning in detail with feedback from me and other participants in this workshop how to get a head start and learn everything you need to publish your book. And also in the works, I'm actually editing right now, is a new course that I have called Slide Fluence. This is how to transform slide decks into dynamic videos that you can use for pitching ideas if you're a leader or entrepreneur, or if you're an educator in the classroom and need to make your presentations and direct instruction more engaging. Also, a couple of resources for you all. My book, Storytelling with Purpose, Digital Projects to Ignite Student Curiosity. And chapter 9 of that book is on using multimedia research projects for assessment. And there's also a chapter on inquiry-based projects in that book. And one of those ideas has evolved into Uncheatable Assessments, an online course that you can take. It's self-paced, and you can also earn 3 continuing education units for your professional development and salary scale in that as well. And I'll share links to all of those in a follow-up email. All right, so thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we can do the Q&A here.